Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. Which celebrity did you originally have a crush on? It's a funny question, but when Johnny Depp hears it, he doesn't anything anybody anticipates. He pauses, grins. After that, Carol Channing. It's not exactly a joke, but like everything otherwise, it's multi-layered with Johnny Depp, with enigma. The face of Hollywood once rebellion, the 61-year-old Johnny Depp, living a life that is very different from the flashing celebrity lights. The individual who once enthralled people worldwide with his charm and mayhem have subtly changed his story, and it's nothing less than incredible. This is Johnny's story, Depp's flight from Hollywood, and the suffering he never spoke in its entirety, and the rebirth that nobody noticed approaching. Without any fanfare, in 2023, Johnny Depp gathered his possessions in Los Angeles and discreetly relocated to England's Somerset. Fans were not said farewell. No dramatic farewell interviews, declarations. He just disappeared from the general public stage for nearly a full year. Not a one appearance on the red carpet or an interview came up. No pictures, no media, nothing. The motivation wasn't secrecy, his absence. It was restorative. In a brief and uncommon chat with a local press, Depp provided a straightforward feeling. I'm not trying to draw attention. No longer. I'm looking for tranquility. That one sentence was swiftly read, social media and into fans' affections who had spent decades observing him. The individual formerly renowned for his unpredictable nature, and now magnetic presence, was looking for stillness, silence. As the world, conjecturing about his location, Depp had discovered a fresh way to express themselves, painting. He expressed his suffering, his thoughts, as well as his internal conflict into canvases. The artwork was personal, weird, and feeling seary. When his compilation, A Bunch of Stuff, had its New York debut it sparked a tempest of praise in 2024. Collectors were prepared to spend as much as $50,000 for prints in limited edition, several selling out before they even made it to the general public. Fans and critics, everyone agreed. It was more than just art. It was color therapy, a glimpse inside his spirit. And music drew him back. Getting back together with Joe and Alice Cooper Depp, and Perry took the stage again with Hollywood Vampires, his band performing throughout Europe. Regardless of whether it was at the Wacken Open Air Festival in Germany or little locations in France, Depp's, the performances were more subdued, more emotionally charged, but restrained. When they were playing Heroes by David Bowie, it seemed to go beyond a simple homage. It seemed similar to a survival anthem. However, the shadows of the past were always present, behind. The injuries he sustained over the years, legal dispute with Amber Heard, the ex-wife still hung on. What began in 2016 with the number of abuse claims swiftly increased, became one of the most widely known scandals in the history of Hollywood. He lost endorsement deals, roles, and was essentially banned by the he formerly controlled an industry. Disney cancelled Pirates of the Caribbean star him, and Warner Brothers took him out of Amazing Creatures. He was portrayed by the media as the antagonist previously, had a trial not even started. Then, the pivotal moment arrived. There was a leaked audio tape that Heard acknowledged hitting Depp and making fun of him for it. The story started to change. The internet exploded with assistance. Sucker justice for Johnny every platform was overrun by Depp. The tide had turned. 2022 saw Depp take the fight in court over a defamation Virginia case, albeit Heard never gave him a name. The Washington Post, the case's central article, Depp claimed that the ramifications were obvious and disastrous. For his professional life, what a 6-week experiment that followed captivated the world. Each and every detail, each image, each audio snippet was investigated. Both parties' witnesses provided heartfelt testimony. Depp informed everyone. The tip of his finger was gone after. Glass bottle was thrown at him by Heard. He described the psychological suffering and he lived in solitude. Heard denied a lot of the assertions, but public opinion was turning already. Ultimately, the jury sided with Depp. Damages were granted to him. Furthermore, Heard's reputation was seriously reduced, although it was a vindication, not a repair. The trial was not free. Years, connections, and fragments of his spirit. He left the world behind, even following the victory. For 2 months, he hardly spoke to anyone. In a private, he stated in the letter that the altercation had never been about getting even. It concerned survival. However, even as he moved away, leaving cinema, his impact remained unabated. He was still featured by Dior in their vicious fragrance campaign that doesn't even making new advertisements. Global sales were broken by the campaign. Records at Paris fashion shows. He was given royal treatment. Hollywood possibly turned away, but the world hadn't. Nevertheless, Depp declined tour turn on the conditions of anybody else. He major studios. Disregarded Coles, even former partners such as Tim Burton and Gilliam Terry. He had none left. Desire to project the image they'd made from him. He wasn't pretending to be Jack, Edward Scissorhands, or Sparrow. He was just Johnny. His comeback to the film industry wasn't noisy, it was intentional. Depp makes his first significant appearance in 2023. Appearance in public following the trial at the Cannes Film Festival, playing the lead role in Jane King Lou XV, played by Dubari. The instant the theatre erupted when the credits rolled into a standing ovation lasting 7 minutes. It wasn't limited to the movie. It was impassionate acknowledgement of all he'd persevered. Daydrinker followed, a drama that was helmed by Mark Webb and Penelope Cruz co-stars. Depp performed a man in deep sorrow, a mirror of his in the last few years. Later, Webb stated, "I didn't require a star, I required a wound." Depp was the wound. Other initiatives came next. Terry Depp was given the part of Satan by Gilliam in a future movie, referring to him as specially suited to represent both inner tranquility and gloom. The commotion was huge, but Depp took his time to agree. Hollywood was no longer necessary for him. He was making his own route. Since 2022, Depp's priorities have been individual recovery. He's not drinking and rehabilitation or public statements. He transformed his diet, included easy practices like morning strolls, resides peacefully in Somerset. He gives books to the neighborhood library. He is frequently seen by locals reading in his garden or going for a morning stroll. A local doctor validated what fans had long held suspicion. He's happier, healthier, and grounded compared to his previous decades. Now, he doesn't snap at reporters. When questioned about Amber Heard during a visit to France, "The past is over," he quietly said. It was time to move on. Previously, when those words would have been spoken long ago, been unthinkable for Johnny to say Depp. His name was synonymous for years with disagreement, controversy, and emotional instability. The court battle with the Amber Heard has taken over every available space in his life. The conflicts weren't limited to courts. They overflowed onto social media, including on film and in newsroom sets. It was more than a tabloid spectacle. It was a total collapse of a man formerly known as Hollywood's Golden Rogue. However, standing in France that day, on a calm afternoon with lovely lighting, he spoke steadily. No fire was present, no hostility evident behind his eyes, merely a feeling of accomplishment. Not tranquility, not precisely, but acceptance. It wasn't an easy moment. It wasn't neither planned nor practiced, and there was no. The media manager is hanging, close by, prepared to step in. Depp was at a show of art, his own. He had painted each and every artwork in the gallery. The space was crowded with friends, eager customers, and journalists from Europe, all of whom are aware of his past, cognizant of the quiet he's continued to do so since his trial. On reporter, using a tactful yet straightforward tone, posed the query that nobody wanted to hear. However, everyone was asking themselves, what did he feelings about Amber now heard? There was a lengthy pause, the type of silence that swallows whole spaces. Depp didn't sidestep the query. He didn't leave or suggest a Lawyer authorized deflection. He glanced at looked the reporter in the eye. Inhaled, and the past is over, he remarked simply. It's time to go. However, the burden of those words are only comprehensible in the background of all that he went through. In the Johnny had been forced years earlier to extremes of emotion. The accusations had negatively impacted his physical and mental health. His career had collapsed in the moment. Large studio had left him. Close companions, they separated. The public shifted within a few days against him. Each and every. The accusation garnered media attention. Every rumor became the canon. The Johnny Depp who used to had a natural smile on red carpets and turned become a shadow of his former self. Behind the scenes, his anger smoldering. According to insiders, he drank a much, punched walls, and vanished for several days. Had declined interviews since. He wasn't, you can rely on anyone to hear him well. He wasn't only opposed to Amber Heard, he was opposing the story that had been built all around him, one that he believed had no tolerance for subtleties, no place for contradiction. In private, he spoke concerning treachery, not only from Heard but from a whole sector that once praised him before dropping him off with the same simplicity. He started to see Hollywood as hollow, a location where allegiance endured solely when headlines were advantageous. However, despite the rage, something started to change. It wasn't abruptly. Like morning, it softly made its way in. After a violent storm. Following the trial concluded in 2022 with the jury's verdict. The noise subsided in his favor. The public's backing has noisily returned, and in overwhelming numbers. Millions of people shared encouraging messages. Artists forwarded. He paints and draws. Supporters wrote entire suitcases were loaded with letters. However, the confirmation didn't result in he had previously believed it would bring him satisfaction. The victory in court didn't seem like a victory and more akin to the conclusion of he'd never wanted to write that chapter. In the ensuing months, he retreated, not with resentment, but rather from necessity. He gave up reading articles. He didn't engage with many people. He withdrawn into his music and paintings, filling it with the suffering that had hung around too long. His closest confidants observed a minor shift. The man who used to yell while pacing the floor, there was now silence over unfairness, contemplative. He started saying stuff like, perhaps everyone loses something, or I'm not upset, I'm only completed. These weren't statements of defeat. They were indications of expansion. When he finally set foot on that stage in France, a part of him relined. He didn't have to demonstrate nothing at all. He was not required to protect himself from outsiders when he mentioned going on, but not because the past was no longer there. The reason behind this was, at last, he no longer carried it like a wound. That will not go away. However, forgetting was not the same as moving on. Depp keeps records from the Yarsa's trial in his private chamber house in Somerset. He avoids glancing at them daily, but he also avoids destroying them. There they stay, a silent archive. Despite all, he managed to survive. However, they don't no longer characterize him. His artwork isn't prolonged, wild outbursts of disobedience. They are now more spacious, calm, and self-control. His music has become more subdued. His voice used to be piercing and rebellious. In interviews are now conducted in a relaxed rhythm. He's started to comprehend the power of quiet, not as a means of escape but as decision. The inquiry about Amber Heard might have set off long-standing defences, but it didn't. Since Depp views the past, had been handled earlier, not in secret, but in public. He had carried out the labour. He had yelled, wept, and shattered items. Now, however, he was building once again. Therefore, when he uttered those words, the past is behind us. The moment has come to move on. The soundbite wasn't one of them. They weren't a press release line. They were the reality of a guy who had at last made harmony with suffering. He had extended forgiveness, not necessarily heard, but by himself, pardoned himself for the decisions that brought him to because of the quiet that kept him enduring the years spent in court and strife. He was no longer in need of retaliation or atonement. All he wanted was tranquility, and at that precise moment, standing quietly, his artwork surrounds a French room. As demonstrated by Johnny Depp, recovery doesn't accompanied by applause. It appears when you put an end to practicing your suffering and just resurrect yourself. His artwork has changed throughout time as well. They are now more scarce and contemplative. A new collection of 12 bizarre, sold to a private gallery in Germany, resembled visual meditations. Regarding pain, the vibrant colours are no longer there. In their location, silence, introspection, and emptiness. His music has changed too. While he whispered, "Private acoustic session," he sung, although his voice was hardly audible, instead of breathing. "I have," he informed a pal. "There is nothing more to brag about. Silence is louder." In spite of the curiosity of media outlets and publishers, Depp has rejected all book deals and interview on television. He is unwilling to describe his life. He desires to live it, writing to Terry Gilliam by hand. "I lost every label that I had," he admitted, "formally characterized me, and during that quiet, I discovered himself." He's not attempting to recover his oldie, Hollywood location, and he's not utterly comfortable in the countryside. Between the two realms, he is a part of silent artist, part legend, and recluse finding his true self again. This is not your average comeback tale. It's not an arc of redemption created for the box office reopens. There's more to it, a silent rebirth. Evidence that even after a person being pulled through the mud can ascend. Not more loudly, but smarter. The change that Johnny Depp has undergone is not a show. It's authentic, unadulterated, and continuing. The world watched for years. Depp projected through a tinted lens everything from outlaw fantasy to him to a troubled talent. He turned into a cultural icon, not only due to his skill, but due to the fact that he appeared to present the roles he performed. Whether it was Captain Jack, the crazy Edward Sparrow, the eerily silent, the crafty and sad Scissorhands, the performances of Donnie Brasco were vivid, realistic, and lived in. However, ironically, while he was turning into additional individuals on screen, somewhere along the way, he became disconnected from himself. Enduring his decades in Hollywood, Depp played by the regulations of the industry. Even as he publicly rejected them, he wore red carpeting grudgingly, grinned during, he detested press junkets, and turned into an unwelcome spokesperson for a celebrity he never requested. At award shows and parties, he would frequently be spotted around the periphery of the space, never really interacting, always a little away. Those that are now close to him claim that he always thought he was wearing a mask, which he was unsure of how to accept away. He was loved, admired, copied, although few people actually saw him. The public unraveling then started. The claims, the litigation, the headlines, the never-ending stories. Additionally, his reputation wasn't the only thing on trial. It was who he was. As the public opinion court ruled quick and frequently harsh decisions, Depp discovered that he had lost the armor he'd always employed for self-defense. Studios left him. Friends disappeared. Even he acknowledged for a time that wondering about his true identity without the cameras, without the roles, without the cheers. However, it was in that collapse that the true changes started. Not the type that comes from desperation or a public relations tactic, but from survival, something more primordial. When everything that formerly characterized him was removed, Depp was forced to face himself. Nor the performer, nor just the man, the star. He needed to sit quietly while surrounded with everything he'd been buried for years. The suffering, the anger, trauma, and terror. He needed to mourn the loss he endured. Not only the career, but the false beliefs he held onto as well. What surfaced wasn't a brand new, the Johnny Depp version. It wasn't a return designed by stylists and publicists. Something slower, more genuine. He began to live, purposefully, far out in Somerset, England from Hollywood. He started to encounter living without a screenplay. He became conscious. Without waiting makeup artists, Hess strolled across the countryside, overlooked. In his garden, he sat and observed the world disappear by. These weren't very impressive actions. They were minor individual uprisings against the life he used to lead. He began painting not as a pastime, but rather a say type of treatment. His initial works were noisy and disorganized, vibrant and disagreement. However, as time passes, the strokes melted. It became quieter on the paintings. His more recent pieces don't aim to impress. They just exist, using tones to communicate that are beyond words. They're depicting a man who is no longer in need of to be perceived similarly. A man who's everything to prove, yet nothing to prove. Communicate. Music also turned into a haven. His roles as a Hollywood vampire shifted the focus from performance to about link. When performing acoustic, he started removing layers, no effects, only his, and no over-production, his voice and his guitar. His singing was less for himself and the audience. It sounded like someone whispering their truth into emptiness. Regardless matter, whether does anyone hear it. His physique evolved, asoke. He became slimmer, lost weight, and not due to an image or studio contract rehabilitation. Nonetheless, since he began taking care of himself once more. Absence of alcohol, longer walks, better meals, and a slower speed. He had no desire to be young. He was accepting his age, his reality, and his fatigue, his desire for tranquility. Additionally, it appeared. Friends saw that his eyes appeared different, albeit not necessarily crisper, more grounded, but brighter. He started attending events instead of selling a movie, but to be there. He is no longer reacted angrily to inquiries. He made no offer, practiced responses. He simply replied, "Ash himself." People now frequently encounter him, elucidate an odd duality. He continues to has a celebrity-like aura, the heaviness, the presence, yet it's not extended performative. It's simply who he is. The root has a quiet strength. He speaks while standing, in the way he allows others to speak without to rule the space. He doesn't walk anymore, like someone looking for something. He walking, as though they are at last pleased, to simply be. He's not fleeing Hollywood, but he's not going after it either. He doesn't leap when offers are made. He waits. He pays attention. Additionally, if something communicates with him not only as an actor but as a person, he takes into it. It was the case with John Deere as well as Daydrinker. Those positions weren't only characters. Mirrors were what they were. He decided to them for what they do, not for glory. Permitted him to describe his location, life. He no longer gauges success by box office, performances or reviews. Success for Depp right now is waking up.